The teardrops that fell from Lillian Greene's face mingled with the dust at Prescott Station, Arizona Territory, 1878, creating tiny dark spots that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed in the scorching June heat. The journey west had drained her last reserves of courage, and now, standing alone on the wooden platform with her single trunk, she couldn't hold back the flood of emotions any longer. She'd been abandoned. Again. The train that had carried her over 2,000 miles from Boston had long since departed, its black smoke trail dissolving into the clear blue sky. The station was nearly deserted now, save for the station master, who occasionally glanced her way with increasing concern as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Lillian dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief that had once been white, but was now gray with travel dust. Her correspondence with Mr. Harvey Thornton of Agua Caliente had been proper and promising 6 months of letters culminating in a marriage proposal and train ticket west. He'd promised to meet her at Prescott Station for the final leg of the journey to his ranch outside Agua Caliente. But 3 hours had passed since the train's arrival, and there was no sign of her intended husband. The station master had already informed her that the next train wouldn't arrive until morning, and the town's only decent boarding house was likely full. Lillian's remaining funds consisted of less than $5, barely enough for a meal, let alone lodging. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep and kind, startling her from her thoughts. Lillian turned to find a tall man watching her with concerned eyes. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of his worn leather hat, but she could make out strong features bronzed by the sun. Dust covered his denim trousers and cotton shirt, and the leather chaps and spurs marked him unmistakably as a cowboy. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied automatically, straightening her back and willing her voice not to crack. It was the same response she'd given throughout her life, whenever anyone noticed her distress when her father drank away their savings, when her mother died of consumption, when the boarding house where she'd worked in Boston had burned down. The cowboy shifted his weight, revealing a lean but powerful frame. He wasn't as young as she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with faint lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun. "Pardon my saying so, madam, but you don't look fine," he said gently. "Been waiting here since the train arrived, haven't you? Expecting someone?" Fresh tears threatened to spill, and Lillian bit the inside of her cheek hard to stop them. "My fiancé was to meet me, Mr. Harvey Thornton of Agua Caliente." The cowboy's expression changed, something flashing across his features too quickly for Lillian to interpret. "Harvey Thornton," he repeated, his tone flat. "Yes, do you know him?" The man removed his hat, revealing thick sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I'm Samuel Porter. I run the Triple P Ranch near Agua Caliente." He hesitated, then continued more gently. "Miss, Harvey Thornton passed away 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick." The world seemed to tilt beneath Lillian's feet. Her knees buckled, and suddenly Samuel Porter's strong hands were grasping her arms, guiding her to a nearby bench. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you," he said, crouching before her. "Word must not have reached you in time." "No," Lillian whispered, staring at her hands. "No word came." Tears flowed freely now, not just for a man she'd never met, but for herself, for the hope that had carried her across the country, for the future that had evaporated like morning dew under the Arizona sun. Samuel Porter watched her quietly for a moment. Then, in a voice so gentle it nearly broke her completely, he said, "You've been strong long enough, haven't you?" The simple truth of his words unleashed something in Lillian, and she covered her face with her hands as sobs shook her frame. She couldn't remember the last time she'd allowed herself to truly cry, perhaps at her mother's funeral 5 years ago. Since then, she'd locked away her grief, her fear, her exhaustion, focusing only on survival. Samuel didn't try to stop her tears or offer empty platitudes. He simply sat beside her on the bench, his presence solid and patient, until the storm of her emotions began to subside. "I have nowhere to go," she finally admitted, her voice hoarse. "No family, no friends here. I spent everything I had on this journey." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Agua Caliente's about 30 miles southwest of here. I've got my wagon and was planning to head back today. He gestured toward the end of the platform where a sturdy wagon stood hitched to two chestnut horses. Mrs. Hollister runs a respectable boarding house in town. She might have room, and if not, my sister Martha lives in town with her husband. She'd be happy to put you up until you sort things out. Lillian stared at him, hardly daring to believe this stroke of fortune. Why would you help me? You don't know me at all. Samuel smiled, and the warmth of it reached his eyes. Out here, Miss Greene, we look after folks in need. It's how we all survive. He stood and offered his hand. What do you say, ready to see what Agua Caliente has to offer? For the first time since stepping off the train, Lillian felt a flicker of hope. She placed her gloved hand in his calloused one and allowed him to help her to her feet. Thank you, Mr. Porter, she said. I accept your kind offer. Samuel tipped his hat. Sam, please. Mr. Porter was my father, and he's been gone 10 years now. He hoisted her trunk effortlessly onto his shoulder. Come along then, we should get moving if we want to make it before dark. As they walked toward the wagon, Lillian couldn't help but wonder if fate had played a cruel joke or offered her an unexpected blessing. Perhaps, she thought as she watched Samuel Porter secure her trunk, it was a bit of both. The journey to Agua Caliente provided Lillian her first true glimpse of the Arizona territory. The landscape was nothing like the lush forests and rolling hills of Massachusetts. Here, red rock formations jutted dramatically from the earth, cacti stood like sentinels across the terrain, and the vast blue sky seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. It's beautiful, she murmured, taking in the wild majesty of it all. Samuel glanced at her with surprise. Most Easterners find it harsh at first. Oh, it is harsh, Lillian agreed, but there's an honesty to it, nothing's hidden here. A smile played at the corners of Samuel's mouth. That's a keen observation, Miss Greene. Lillian, please, she offered, feeling somehow that formalities were as out of place in this landscape as her high-buttoned boots and tailored traveling suit. Lillian, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. Tell me, what brought you to agree to marry Harvey Thornton? If you don't mind my asking, she considered the question, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Necessity, primarily, she admitted. After the boarding house where I worked burned down, I had few options. Mr. Thornton's advertisement seeking a bride mentioned needing someone to help run his ranch and care for his home. His letters were respectful and kind. Samuel nodded. Harvey was a decent man, had about 80 acres and a small herd, nothing fancy, but he kept it well. What will happen to his property now? His nephew from back east inherited everything. Fellow named James Thornton arrived last week to settle affairs. Lillian absorbed this information silently. Another door closed. And your ranch, she asked after a while, the Triple P. Pride crept into Samuel's voice. 3,000 acres, madam, started with just 50 head of cattle when my pa died, up to nearly 500 now. That's impressive, Lillian said sincerely, been hard work. My brother Thomas and I run it together, though he handles more of the business end from town. I prefer being out with the herd. He glanced at her. What about your family back east? Lillian smoothed her skirt. There isn't any. My mother died of consumption 5 years ago, my father. She hesitated, passed not long after from complications of drink. Samuel's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry to hear that. They fell into comfortable silence as the wagon rolled steadily toward Agua Caliente. The afternoon heat gradually gave way to cooler air as the sun began its descent. Lillian found herself stealing glances at her companion, noting the confident way he handled the team, the straight line of his shoulders, the profile that might have been carved from the surrounding landscape. There it is, Samuel said eventually, pointing toward a collection of buildings nestled in a valley ahead. Agua Caliente. The town was modest but appeared more established than Lillian had expected. A main street ran through its center, lined with wood and adobe buildings. She could make out a church steeple, several stores, what looked to be a hotel, and various other businesses. Named for the hot springs about a mile south of town, Samuel explained. The Spanish found them long before Americans settled here. Town's been growing steady since silver was found in '67. As they drew closer, Lillian could see people moving about, women in practical dresses carrying baskets, men in work clothes, children playing chase between buildings. It looked like a proper community, not just a rough mining settlement. "We'll try Mrs. Hollister's first," Samuel decided as they entered town. "Her place is just past the general store." Heads turned as they made their way down the main street. Samuel tipped his hat to various townspeople, exchanging brief greetings. Lillian felt curious eyes upon her and sat straighter, determined not to appear as lost as she felt. Mrs. Hollister's boarding house was a tidy 2-story building with a small front garden. Samuel helped Lillian down from the wagon, his hands firm yet gentle at her waist, before retrieving her trunk. The proprietress answered their knock promptly, a plump woman in her 50s with keen eyes and an appraising expression. "Samuel Porter, twice in 1 week. To what do I owe this pleasure?" "Mrs. Hollister, this is Miss Lillian Greene from Boston," Samuel introduced. "She's arrived to find her intended, Harvey Thornton, has passed on. She needs lodging while she sorts out her situation." Mrs. Hollister's expression softened immediately. "Oh, you poor dear, what a terrible shock." She ushered them inside. "I did have 1 room left, thank the Lord. Just cleaned it this morning after Mr. Henderson departed for Tucson." Relief washed over Lillian. "Thank you, I'm very grateful." "It's $2 a week, including breakfast and supper," Mrs. Hollister explained. "Payable in advance." Lillian's heart sank. Her remaining funds wouldn't cover even 3 days. Before she could speak, Samuel stepped forward. "I'll settle a month in advance, Mrs. Hollister. Miss Greene has had a long journey." "Mr. Porter, I couldn't possibly," Lillian began. "Consider it a loan," Samuel said firmly. "Until you find your footing," Mrs. Hollister beamed. "Well, that's settled then. Let me show you to your room, dear. Supper's at 6 sharp. As the older woman led the way upstairs, Lillian turned to Samuel. "I will repay you," she promised. "Every cent." "I have no doubt," he replied with a small smile. "I'll call on you tomorrow, see how you're settling in, perhaps show you around town a bit." After Samuel departed, Mrs. Hollister showed Lillian to a small but clean room at the rear of the house. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand with pitcher and basin, a simple dresser, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked a small garden. "It's not fancy," Mrs. Hollister apologized, "but the linens are fresh and the mattress doesn't have lumps." "It's perfect," Lillian assured her. "Thank you." Left alone, Lillian sank onto the bed, the events of the day crashing over her. She had arrived in Agua Caliente a mail-order bride, only to discover she was a widow before ever being a wife. Yet somehow, through the kindness of a stranger with gentle eyes and strong hands, she wasn't sleeping on the depot floor or worse. As she unpacked her meager belongings, Lillian wondered what tomorrow would bring in this strange new land and whether Samuel Porter would indeed return as promised. The gentle knock on her door the following morning startled Lillian from her thoughts. She had risen with the sun, dressed in her second-best day dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim, and had been staring out the window at Agua Caliente as it came to life. "Yes." She called, smoothing her hair. Mrs. Hollister poked her head in. "Breakfast is ready, dear, and you have a visitor waiting downstairs." Surprised, Lillian followed her hostess down to the dining room where several other boarders were already eating. At the far end of the table stood Samuel Porter, hat in hand. He traded yesterday's dusty work clothes for clean denims and a pressed white shirt, though his boots were still worn and practical. "Good morning, Miss Greene," he greeted her with a small bow. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," she replied, aware of the curious glances from the other boarders. "Though I wasn't expecting you quite so early," Samuel smiled. "Early risers get the most done out here. I thought I might show you around town after breakfast, introduce you to some folks, if you're agreeable." "That's very kind, I would appreciate it." After a hearty breakfast of flapjacks, eggs, and strong coffee, Lillian donned her bonnet and joined Samuel outside. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching day. "I thought we might start at my brother's store," Samuel suggested as they walked down the main street. "Thomas and his wife Elizabeth run the general store. They know everyone in Agua Caliente and might have some ideas about work for you." Lillian nodded gratefully. Work is precisely what I need. I can't live on your charity indefinitely. It's not charity, Samuel corrected gently. It's being neighborly. You'd do the same if our positions were reversed. The general store occupied a prime corner location at the intersection of Main Street and what Samuel explained was called Silver Avenue. A bell jingled as they entered the well-stocked establishment. Shelves lined the walls filled with dry goods, tools, fabric, and sundries, while barrels of flour, sugar, and coffee sat in neat rows. The scent of leather, tobacco, spices, and coffee created a pleasant aroma. Behind the counter stood a man who bore a clear resemblance to Samuel, though he was slightly shorter and broader, with the same sandy hair but a fuller beard. Beside him, a pretty woman with chestnut hair was arranging a display of ribbons. "Tommy, Elizabeth," Samuel called, "I'd like you to meet Miss Lillian Greene from Boston." Thomas Porter came forward with a warm smile. "So you're the lady Sam rescued from the depot. Welcome to Agua Caliente, Miss Greene." Elizabeth Porter hurried over as well, taking Lillian's hands in hers. "Oh, we're so pleased to meet you. Samuel told us about your situation when he stopped by last night. What a dreadful shock about Mr. Thornton." "Thank you both for your kind welcome," Lillian replied, touched by their genuine warmth. "Miss Greene is looking for employment," Samuel explained. "I thought you might have some suggestions." Thomas stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Well now, what are your skills, Miss Greene?" "I worked as an assistant at a ladies' boarding house in Boston for several years," Lillian explained. "I can cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts. I also taught basic reading and arithmetic to the children of working mothers for extra income." Elizabeth's eyes lit up. "Teaching? That's perfect. Our school teacher, Miss Perkins, is leaving at the end of the month to get married. The town council's been searching for a replacement." "I'm not a trained teacher," Lillian cautioned, "just experienced with children." "That's more qualification than anyone else who stepped forward," Thomas assured her. "Schoolmaster's position comes with a small cabin behind the schoolhouse and $15 a month salary during the school term." Lillian's heart leapt. A home of her own and steady income, it was more than she dared hope for so quickly. "The town council meets tomorrow evening," Elizabeth continued excitedly. "Samuel can introduce you to Mayor Collins today. I'm sure they'd be delighted to consider you. In the meantime," Thomas added, "Elizabeth could use help with inventory this week if you're interested. We'd pay fair wages." "That would be wonderful," Lillian said gratefully. "When could I start?" "Right now, if you're willing," Elizabeth laughed. "We've just received our monthly shipment from Phoenix and everything needs cataloging." Samuel's expression was pleased but somewhat reserved. "I'd planned to show Miss Greene around town today." "Oh, go on with your tour," Elizabeth insisted. "Bring her back after lunch, Samuel." As they continued their walk through Agua Caliente, Samuel pointed out the various establishments: the bank, the Silver Dollar Saloon, the blacksmith shop, Dr. Wilson's office, the church, and finally, the schoolhouse. It was a simple one-room building painted white with a small bell tower. Behind it stood a modest cabin, weathered but solid. "That would be your home if you get the position," Samuel explained as they peered through the schoolhouse windows at the rows of desks inside. "It's perfect," Lillian breathed, already imagining herself at the teacher's desk, helping children learn their letters and numbers. Samuel studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You really think you could be happy here? It's not Boston." Lillian turned to face him fully. "Mr. Porter, Sam," he corrected. "Sam," she amended with a small smile. "Boston holds nothing for me but difficult memories. I came west seeking a new beginning. The circumstances may have changed, but that desire hasn't." He nodded slowly. "Well, I hope Agua Caliente proves worthy of your fresh start." "It's already shown me more kindness than I expected," she replied softly. Their eyes held for a moment longer than was perhaps proper, and Lillian felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. Samuel cleared his throat and gestured toward a small restaurant across the street. "Shall we have some lunch before I return you to the mercantile?" Over a simple but delicious meal of beef stew and freshly baked bread, Samuel told Lillian more about the town and its residents. Agua Caliente had been founded 12 years earlier after silver was discovered in the nearby mountains. The boom had been modest compared to some strikes, but substantial enough to establish a stable community. When the richest veins played out, many stayed on, turning to ranching and farming in the fertile valley. "What about the native people of this region?" Lillian asked. "I've read accounts in the newspapers." Samuel's expression grew serious. "The Yavapai and Apache tribes have been here for centuries. There's been conflict, I won't deny it, some terrible things done on both sides." He paused, considering his words carefully. "The army established a reservation about 60 miles east. Many were forced there, but some bands still live in the mountains, trying to maintain their traditional ways. Is there much danger? Not like there was 10 years ago. There's an uneasy peace now, though sometimes cattle go missing." He took a sip of coffee. "I've traded with some of the Yavapai men. They're good horsemen, knowledgeable about the land. If we'd all tried understanding each other from the beginning instead of fighting, might have been a different story." Lillian appreciated his honesty and lack of the virulent prejudice she'd sometimes encountered in Eastern newspapers. "It sounds like you respect them." "A man should respect anyone who fights to protect their home and family," he replied simply. "Doesn't mean I approved of all their methods, nor they mine, I expect." As they walked back to the general store, Samuel continued pointing out places and people of interest. He seemed to know everyone, and all greeted him with genuine respect and warmth. "You're well liked here," Lillian observed. Samuel shrugged. "Been here since I was 16, helped build some of these buildings, pulled a few folks out of tight spots over the years." "Like me," she said with a small smile, his eyes crinkled at the corners. "You're doing just fine, Miss Greene." "Better than fine." At the Mercantile, Elizabeth welcomed Lillian enthusiastically and soon had her counting inventory and recording figures in a ledger. Samuel departed with a promise to return the next day to escort her to the town council meeting. Elizabeth proved to be a delightful companion, chatting easily as they worked their way through boxes of goods. By mid-afternoon, Lillian felt she'd learned the entire history of Agua Caliente and its inhabitants. "Samuel's never shown such interest in a newcomer before," Elizabeth remarked casually as they unpacked a crate of fabric. Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "He's simply being kind to someone in unfortunate circumstances." Elizabeth smiled knowingly. "Samuel's always kind, but he typically keeps to himself. He's more comfortable with cattle than people most days." "Really, he seems very at ease with everyone we met today." "Oh, he's not shy," Elizabeth clarified, "just private." After his engagement ended 5 years ago, he threw himself into building the ranch, rarely comes to town except for supplies and church. Lillian's curiosity was piqued despite herself. "He was engaged," Elizabeth nodded, "to Caroline Mitchell. Her father owned the bank. She broke it off when a wealthy mine owner from Tucson came courting. Samuel was devastated, though he'd never admit it." "That's terrible," Lillian said, genuinely outraged on his behalf. "Some good came of it," Elizabeth said philosophically. The ranch prospered beyond anyone's expectations under his focused attention. The Triple P is now one of the most successful operations in the territory. As they continued working, Lillian found her thoughts returning repeatedly to Samuel Porter, his kindness, his quiet strength, the sadness she occasionally glimpsed in his eyes. She told herself it was natural to be curious about someone who'd helped her so generously, but deep down, she recognized a dangerous flutter of interest that went beyond simple gratitude. That evening, after a filling supper at the boarding house, Lillian sat in the small parlor with Mrs. Hollister and 2 other female boarders. The conversation inevitably turned to her arrival and Samuel Porter's involvement. "Such a fine man," sighed Miss Winters, an unmarried seamstress of about 40. "Handsome as the day is long and rich as Croesus, but can't get him to look twice at any woman in town since the Mitchell girl broke his heart." "Not for lack of trying," Mrs. Hollister chuckled. "Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, but he's always the perfect gentleman and nothing more. Perhaps he simply hasn't found the right woman," suggested Mrs. Reynolds, a young widow. 3 pairs of eyes turned speculatively toward Lillian, who busied herself with her mending. It would be quite a fairy tale, Miss Winters mused. The Eastern lady rescued at the depot by the handsome rancher. I've known Samuel since he was a boy, Mrs. Hollister said more practically. He doesn't do anything without careful consideration. If he's taken an interest in your welfare, Miss Greene, it's because he sees something worthwhile in you. Lillian looked up from her needlework. Mr. Porter has been extraordinarily kind, but I'm certain his interest is purely neighborly. Besides, I've only just arrived and have many challenges ahead before I can consider other matters. The women exchanged knowing glances but mercifully changed the subject. Later, as Lillian prepared for bed in her small room, she found herself standing before the small mirror, studying her reflection more critically than usual. At 23, she was no longer a fresh-faced girl. Years of hard work had left their mark in the tiny lines beginning at the corners of her eyes and the calluses on her hands that no amount of lotion could soften. Her light brown hair, currently braided for sleep, was her best feature, thick and lustrous with hints of gold when the sun caught it. Her eyes were a clear hazel, more green than brown, set in an oval face with regular features. Not a beauty by Boston standards, but pleasant enough, she turned away from the mirror with a self-deprecating smile. What did it matter how she looked? Her goal was independence, not romance. Samuel Porter's interest, whatever its nature, was a blessing for the practical assistance it provided, nothing more. Yet, as she drifted off to sleep, it was his kind eyes and the gentle timbre of his voice saying, "You've been strong long enough," that followed her into dreams. The town council meeting the following evening proved to be less intimidating than Lillian had feared. Mayor Collins, a jovial man with an impressive mustache, welcomed her warmly after Samuel's introduction. The council members, the doctor, the banker, the minister, and 2 prominent businessmen, seemed genuinely pleased that a well-spoken, educated woman had appeared to fill their vacant teaching position. Miss Greene, your experience with children is exactly what we're looking for, Mayor Collins assured her after she'd outlined her background. Our school has 28 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. The term runs from September through May with breaks for harvest and Christmas. What about my lack of formal teaching credentials? Lillian asked. The minister, Reverend Adams, waved away her concern. Arizona Territory isn't as particular about such things as the eastern states. You're clearly well educated, and more importantly, you have experience managing children. That's the real challenge. After a brief deliberation, the council voted unanimously to offer Lillian the position of schoolteacher beginning with the September term. In the interim, they agreed she could move into the teacher's cabin immediately and would receive a small stipend for preparing the schoolhouse and curriculum. This is wonderful news, Samuel said as they walked back to the boarding house after the meeting. The evening was pleasantly cool after the heat of the day, with a quarter moon hanging in the velvet sky. You must be pleased. I'm overwhelmed, Lillian admitted, her voice thick with emotion. Yesterday morning I was alone at a train depot with no prospects. Now I have employment, housing, and... She hesitated, glancing at him. Friends. Samuel's smile was warm in the moonlight. Life can change quickly out here, for better or worse. I'm learning that, she agreed. I feel almost guilty for my good fortune, considering the circumstances. Harvey would have wanted his intended to be settled and happy, Samuel assured her. He was that kind of man. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Lillian gathered her courage. Elizabeth mentioned you rarely come to town. Won't your ranch suffer from all this time spent helping me? Samuel looked faintly embarrassed. Thomas talks too much. The ranch is fine. I have good men working for me, and this is our quieter season before the fall roundup. Still, I don't want to impose further on your generosity. You've done more than enough. He stopped walking, turning to face her. Lillian, helping you hasn't been an imposition, quite the opposite. In fact, the intensity in his gaze made her heart flutter inexplicably. What do you mean? For a moment, Samuel looked as though he might say something significant. Instead, he shook his head slightly. Just that it's been refreshing. To see Agua Caliente through new eyes makes me appreciate it more. Though she sensed there was more he wasn't saying, Lillian nodded acceptance of his explanation. Well, I'm grateful nonetheless, and I promise not to monopolize your time once I'm settled in the teacher's cabin. I hope you'll still welcome visits, Samuel said, resuming their walk. I'd like to make sure you're getting on all right. I'd like that very much, she replied softly. At the boarding house steps, Samuel removed his hat. I'll come by on Saturday morning to help you move your belongings to the cabin if that suits. That would be perfect, thank you. He tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Greene. Good night, Mr. Porter. As she watched him walk away down the moonlit street, Lillian was struck by how quickly she'd come to depend on his steady presence. The thought both comforted and alarmed her. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Lillian continued helping at the mercantile, earning enough to begin repaying Samuel for the boarding house fees. Elizabeth proved to be a true friend, introducing Lillian to other women in town and offering practical advice about life in Agua Caliente. On Thursday, Elizabeth insisted on closing the store early to take Lillian to inspect the teacher's cabin. We'll need to give it a thorough cleaning, Elizabeth declared as they approached the simple structure behind the schoolhouse. Miss Perkins was a lovely teacher but not the most diligent housekeeper. The cabin consisted of 2 rooms, a main living area with a small iron stove for cooking and heating, and a bedroom just large enough for a bed and dresser. A hand pump at the kitchen sink provided water, and an outhouse stood discreetly at the rear of the property. The furniture was basic but solid: a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair, a narrow bed, and a dresser with a mirror. 2 small windows let in light and air. It's perfect, Lillian declared, already envisioning how she would arrange her few belongings, with some cleaning and perhaps curtains. Exactly what I was thinking, Elizabeth agreed. I have some fabric remnants at the store that would make lovely curtains, and I'm sure we can find a colorful quilt to brighten things up. By Saturday morning, thanks to Elizabeth's organizational skills and the help of several other women in town, the cabin had been transformed. Fresh whitewash brightened the walls, new blue-checked curtains hung at the windows, and a colorful patchwork quilt that had been a wedding gift to Elizabeth covered the bed. When Samuel arrived at the boarding house to transport Lillian's trunk, he found her on the porch with Mrs. Hollister settled up and ready to depart. You look happy this morning, he observed as he loaded her trunk into his wagon. I am, Lillian confirmed. For the first time in years, I feel hopeful. The drive to the cabin was short, but Lillian treasured these moments with Samuel. Over the past days, she'd come to admire not just his kindness, but his intelligence and quiet humor. Their conversations flowed easily, covering everything from books they'd read to their hopes for the future. Elizabeth and some other ladies have been working on the cabin, Lillian explained as they approached. They've been extraordinarily welcoming. Samuel smiled. People recognize goodness when they see it. You've made quite an impression in a short time. When they entered the cabin, Samuel looked around approvingly. They've done a fine job. It's downright cozy. Lillian watched his expression as he took in the modest space. It's small, but it's mine. That means a great deal. His eyes met hers with understanding. Having something that belongs just to you, yes, that's important. There was something in his tone that suggested deeper meaning, but before Lillian could pursue it, a knock came at the open door. Thomas Porter stood there with a wooden crate in his arms. Housewarming gifts, he announced, setting the crate on the table. Basic provisions to get you started: flour, coffee, sugar, salt pork, beans, and such. That's incredibly generous, Lillian said, touched by the thoughtfulness. Community takes care of its own, Thomas replied simply. And you're one of us now. After Thomas departed, Samuel helped Lillian unpack her trunk and arrange her belongings. The domesticity of the situation wasn't lost on either of them, and occasionally their hands would brush as they worked, sending an inexplicable warmth through Lillian's veins. Will you stay for lunch? She asked when they'd finished. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage coffee and sandwiches. Samuel hesitated. I should be getting back to the ranch. Please, Lillian said. It's the least I can do to thank you for everything. he relented with a smile. Well, when you put it that way. As Lillian prepared a simple meal, Samuel built a fire in the stove, his capable hands arranging the wood with practiced efficiency. The small cabin felt suddenly perfectly right, with his presence filling it, a dangerous thought that Lillian quickly suppressed. They ate at the small table by the window, sunlight streaming in to illuminate Samuel's features. Lillian found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strong line of his jaw, the confident but gentle way he moved through the world. "I've been meaning to ask," Samuel said as they finished eating, "would you like to visit the ranch sometime? It's about an hour's ride from town." Lillian's heart leapt at the invitation. "I'd love to. I've never seen a working cattle ranch. How about tomorrow, after church services?" "I could bring a wagon for you." "That would be wonderful," she agreed, trying to temper her enthusiasm to an appropriate level. As Samuel prepared to leave, he paused in the doorway. "Lillian, I'm glad things have worked out for you here." The simple sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "Because of you, Sam, I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." He shook his head. "There's nothing to repay. Seeing you settled and happy is enough." He hesitated, then added more softly, "more than enough." After he'd gone, Lillian moved about her new home, touching the furniture, adjusting the curtains, reveling in the knowledge that this space was hers. Yet she couldn't deny that the cabin had felt most alive, most like home when Samuel had been in it. The following day dawned clear and bright. Lillian dressed carefully in her Sunday best, a navy blue dress with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her hair in a neat bun. Church services would be her first formal introduction to the entire community, and she wanted to make a good impression. The small church was filled to capacity when she arrived. Elizabeth waved her over to sit with the Porter family, introducing her to their children, 10-year-old James and 8-year-old Margaret. Samuel arrived moments later, looking uncommonly formal in a dark suit, his hair neatly combed. "You look lovely," he whispered as he took the seat beside her, the compliment sending a flush to her cheeks. After the service, Reverend Adams formally introduced Lillian to the congregation as their new schoolteacher. She was overwhelmed by the warm welcome she received, with parents bringing children forward to meet her and everyone offering assistance and advice. "They've taken to you," Samuel observed with approval as they prepared to depart for the ranch. "Everyone has been so kind," Lillian said, still amazed by her reception. The drive to the Triple P Ranch took them through increasingly rugged country, with the land transitioning from the relatively flat valley around Agua Caliente to rolling hills covered with mesquite, juniper, and prickly pear cactus. "All this is yours?" Lillian asked as they crested a rise that revealed a stunning vista of rangeland. "From that ridge line to the east all the way to the creek that runs through that distant valley," Samuel confirmed, a note of pride in his voice. 3,000 acres of the best grazing land in the territory. As they approached the ranch headquarters, Lillian could see a substantial log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. The setting was magnificent, with mountains providing a dramatic backdrop to the scene. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Samuel's expression softened as he surveyed his domain. "It's home, has been since I was a boy." He introduced Lillian to his ranch foreman, Miguel Vasquez, and several cowboys who were working near the house. Everyone treated her with respect and barely concealed curiosity. "They're wondering what you're doing here," Samuel explained with a wry smile as he showed her around the main house. "I don't usually bring visitors." The house was larger than Lillian had expected, with a spacious main room dominated by a stone fireplace, a well-appointed kitchen, and 3 bedrooms. The furnishings were sturdy and masculine but comfortable. "Did you build this yourself?" she asked, running her hand along a beautifully crafted bookshelf filled with volumes. "My father built the original cabin. Thomas and I expanded it over the years." He looked faintly embarrassed. "It's too big for just one person, but I always thought." He trailed off. "That you'd have a family someday," Lillian finished softly. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Yes." The moment stretched between them. charged with unspoken possibilities, until Samuel cleared his throat and suggested they have the picnic lunch he'd packed. They ate on a hillside overlooking a meadow where cattle grazed lazily in the afternoon sun. The food was simple but delicious: cold chicken, fresh bread, apples, and lemonade. "Tell me about Boston," Samuel requested as they finished eating. "What was your life like there?" Lillian considered the question. "Difficult, mostly. After my mother died, my father's drinking worsened. I was 17 when he passed, with no money and few options. Mrs. Brewster, who ran the boarding house, took me in as her assistant in exchange for room and board. That was fortunate. Yes, she was kind. The work was hard but honest: cooking, cleaning, mending, keeping accounts. When the boarding house burned last winter, Mrs. Brewster decided to retire to her sister's home in Connecticut." "Leaving you without position or home," Samuel surmised. Lillian nodded. "Exactly. I answered Mr. Thornton's advertisement more out of desperation than romantic inclination, though his letters were respectful and kind. He seemed to want a partner, not just a housekeeper or other things." Samuel's expression darkened. "Some men advertise for wives with dishonorable intentions." "Yes, I was cautious. Mr. Thornton's references checked out, and he never wrote anything inappropriate. He seemed lonely and genuinely desirous of companionship." "Harvey was a good man," Samuel confirmed. "Quiet, hardworking. His wife died in childbirth 10 years ago, lost the baby too." "Never remarried? How sad," Lillian murmured. "Life can be harsh out here," Samuel said, his gaze sweeping the beautiful but unforgiving landscape. "But there's honesty in that harshness, as you noted. No pretense, no hiding behind social niceties like in the cities. Is that why you stay?" "The honesty of it," he considered this. "Partly. Mostly it's the freedom. Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his background or connections. I find peace in that." Lillian understood completely. "In Boston, my prospects were limited by my father's reputation, my lack of family connections, my modest education. Here, it's as though none of that matters." "It doesn't," Samuel confirmed. "What matters is who you are now, what you contribute to the community, how you treat others." As the afternoon progressed, they walked along a creek that ran through the property, Samuel pointing out various plants and animals and explaining aspects of ranch operations. His passion for the land was evident in every word, every gesture. "You truly love it here," Lillian observed. "I do," he admitted, "though sometimes I wonder if I've become too attached to this place, to this life." "What do you mean?" he sighed, skipping a stone across the creek's surface. "A man can hide from certain truths by keeping busy, by focusing on building something tangible. The ranch has been my excuse to avoid other considerations." "Like finding a wife?" Lillian asked softly, surprised by her own boldness. Samuel's eyes met hers, startlingly direct. "Yes." The single word hung between them, laden with implication. Lillian felt her heart race as Samuel took a step toward her, then hesitated, uncertainty flashing across his features. "We should head back," he said abruptly. "It'll be getting dark soon." The return journey to town was quieter, both lost in their thoughts. As they approached her cabin, Samuel finally broke the silence. "I've enjoyed today very much, Lillian." "As have I," she replied, gathering her courage. "Sam, would you like to come for supper sometime this week? I'm not the best cook, but I make a decent beef stew." His smile was warm with something that looked like relief. "I'd like that very much. Wednesday evening?" Wednesday would be perfect. As she prepared for bed that night, Lillian found herself humming a tune she hadn't sung in years, a simple love song her mother used to sing while doing laundry. She caught herself and stopped, surprised by her own lightheartedness. Was she falling in love with Samuel Porter? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She barely knew him, yet she felt connected to him in a way she'd never experienced before. His kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength all called to something deep within her. But was she ready for such feelings? Her life had just begun to stabilize. The teaching position would give her the independence she'd craved for years. Getting swept away in romantic notions could jeopardize everything she'd worked for. And what of Samuel's feelings? He'd been kind, certainly, even attentive. but a man in his position, successful, respected, handsome, must have many options. Why would he be interested in a penniless mail-order bride who'd arrived on his doorstep by accident? Lillian sighed, extinguishing her lamp. She was getting far ahead of herself. Better to focus on establishing her new life, preparing for her teaching duties, and being a good friend to Samuel. Whatever else might develop would have to unfold in its own time. The days leading up to Wednesday passed quickly. Lillian spent mornings at the schoolhouse, familiarizing herself with the texts and materials, afternoons helping at the mercantile, and evenings preparing her cabin and planning lessons. She found herself watching the clock on Wednesday, anticipation building as the hour of Samuel's visit approached. She'd spent the previous day baking bread and had splurged on a bottle of wine from the mercantile. The stew had been simmering all afternoon, filling the cabin with savory aromas. She'd even picked wildflowers for the table and worn her best everyday dress, a green cotton that Elizabeth insisted brought out the color of her eyes. Samuel arrived precisely at 6, hat in hand, with a small package wrapped in brown paper. He'd clearly come straight from work but had made an effort to clean up, his hair still damp from washing. "Something smells wonderful," he said by way of greeting. "I hope it tastes as good as it smells," Lillian replied, taking his hat and the package. "What's this?" "Just a small gift." "Open it later." The evening passed in comfortable conversation over the simple but hearty meal. Samuel complimented her cooking enthusiastically, and Lillian felt an absurd sense of pride in having pleased him. "I visited Harvey Thornton's nephew yesterday," Samuel mentioned as they lingered over coffee. "James Thornton is selling the ranch, wants to return east as soon as possible." "Oh, is that unusual?" "Not entirely. Some folks aren't cut out for life here. But it's a shame, it's good land, and Harvey worked hard to build it up." "What will happen to it?" Samuel hesitated. "Actually, I'm considering buying it. It borders my property to the south, would be a natural expansion for the Triple P." "That sounds sensible," Lillian agreed. "Though I imagine it would mean more work for you." "More land means more cattle, which means more hands needed," he acknowledged. "But it's a good investment. The territory's growing. Beef prices are strong." He paused, studying her. "What about you? How are the school preparations coming along?" They discussed her plans for the upcoming term, Samuel offering insights about the families whose children would be her pupils. His knowledge of the community continued to impress Lillian. He seemed to know not just everyone's names but their histories, strengths, and challenges. "You would have made a good teacher yourself," she observed. He laughed. "Not likely, I've never had the patience for it, but I admire those who do." As the evening drew to a close, Lillian remembered the package he'd brought. "May I open your gift now?" Samuel nodded, suddenly looking slightly self-conscious. "It's nothing elaborate." Lillian carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. "It's exquisite," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed work. "I made it," Samuel admitted. "Woodworking is a hobby in the winter months when ranch work slows." "You made this?" Lillian was astonished by the craftsmanship. "Samuel, it's beautiful, thank you. Open it," he urged softly. Inside, nestled on a small cushion of velvet, lay a silver hairpin topped with a small turquoise stone. "Oh my," Lillian whispered, lifting it carefully. "It was my mother's," Samuel explained, his voice low. "She always said the color reminded her of the Arizona sky in summer, I thought." "Well, I thought it would suit you." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes at the deeply personal gift. "Sam, I couldn't possibly accept something so precious." "Please," he said simply. "I want you to have it. My mother would have liked you very much, Lillian." Their eyes met across the table, and Lillian felt something shift between them, a door opening to possibilities she'd scarcely allowed herself to imagine. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to articulate the emotions swirling within her. When Samuel left that evening, he paused at the door. "May I call on you again? Perhaps Sunday after church. We could ride out to the hot springs if you'd like. They're quite beautiful." "I'd enjoy that very much," Lillian replied, her heart quickening at the prospect. The brief, gentle brush of his lips against her cheek as he said goodnight left her skin tingling long after he'd gone. Over the next weeks, a gentle courtship unfolded between them. Samuel called regularly, sometimes for meals, sometimes to take Lillian riding or driving through the countryside. They attended church together on Sundays, took picnics by the creek, and spent evenings talking on the porch of Lillian's cabin. Agua Caliente noticed, of course. Lillian became accustomed to knowing smiles and gentle teasing from Elizabeth and other friends, even Mrs. Hollister commented approvingly when Lillian stopped by the boarding house for tea. "Samuel Porter is a changed man," the older woman declared. "Haven't seen him smile so much since he was a boy. You've been good for him, my dear." "We're simply friends," Lillian protested weakly. Mrs. Hollister snorted. "Friends, indeed. The man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars, child." As the summer progressed and the start of the school term approached, Lillian found herself increasingly certain of her feelings for Samuel. His steady presence, his integrity, his quiet strength all had become essential to her happiness. Yet he had made no declaration beyond friendship, though his actions and the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her suggested deeper emotions. On a sweltering August afternoon, 3 weeks before school was to begin, Samuel arrived unexpectedly at Lillian's cabin. His expression was troubled, his manner distracted. "Sam, is something wrong?" she asked as she invited him in. He paced the small room before stopping abruptly. "I've received word from the army. A band of renegade Apache warriors attacked a stagecoach about 40 miles east of here yesterday. 2 passengers killed," Lillian gasped. "How terrible!" Lieutenant Colonel Bradley has requested civilian volunteers to join a tracking party. "I'll be leaving at first light tomorrow with several of my men." Fear clutched at Lillian's heart. "Is it dangerous?" Samuel's expression was grim. "It can be. These aren't ordinary Apache, they're a small band led by a warrior called Black Knife who refused to go to the reservation. They're desperate and well armed. How long will you be gone? Hard to say. A few days, perhaps longer if the trail is difficult to follow." He took her hands in his. "Lillian, I don't like leaving you, but I gave my word to the colonel. The army's short-handed, and those of us who know the terrain have a responsibility to help." "Of course you must go," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite her fear. "Just, please be careful, Sam." His eyes searched hers. "There's something I need to say before I leave." "Something I should have said weeks ago." Lillian's heart raced as Samuel took both her hands in his. "Lillian Greene, from the moment I saw you crying at that depot, something changed in me. I'd closed myself off for years, convinced that my life would be the ranch and nothing more. Then you arrived, and suddenly I remembered what it was to hope, to dream of a future that included more than cattle and land." "Sam," she whispered, tears forming. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I started falling in love with you that very first day when you squared your shoulders and tried to be brave despite everything. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you've embraced this place and its people." He took a deep breath. "I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but I couldn't leave tomorrow without telling you how I feel." Joy surged through Lillian, bright and overwhelming. "It's not too soon," she assured him, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, Samuel Porter. I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but it's true. I love you." The kiss they shared was tender at first, then deepened with all the emotion they'd held in check for weeks. When they finally parted, both breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "When I return," he promised, "we'll talk about our future. If you'll have me, Lillian, I want to build a life with you." "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, yes." That night, after Samuel had left with a final kiss and promised to return safely, Lillian found sleep impossible. Joy at their declarations warred with fear for his safety. The thought of losing him now, just when they'd finally acknowledged their feelings, was unbearable. She rose before dawn the next morning, determined to see him off. The town was quiet as she made her way to the meeting point outside the sheriff's office. A group of men on horseback was already gathered. Samuel, 4 of his ranch hands, Sheriff Davis, and several other men she recognized from town. Samuel's face lit up when he saw her. He dismounted quickly and came to her side. "I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye," she explained. He cupped her face gently. I'm glad. Having something precious to return to will keep me cautious. Please be safe, she whispered, fighting tears. Come back to me. I will, he promised. Nothing could keep me away. Their goodbye kiss was brief but filled with promise. As she watched him ride away with the others, Lillian offered a silent prayer for his safe return. The days that followed were the longest of Lillian's life. She threw herself into preparations for the school term, cleaning the schoolhouse, organizing materials, and visiting families of her future pupils. Nights were the hardest, when worry gnawed at her and every distant sound had her rushing to the window, hoping to see Samuel returning. 5 days after his departure, Lillian was arranging books on shelves in the schoolhouse when she heard a commotion outside. Heart racing, she hurried to the door to find a small group of riders entering town. Samuel was among them, looking dusty and tired but unharmed. She ran without thinking, heedless of the curious onlookers. Samuel dismounted just in time to catch her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in a tight embrace. You're safe, she breathed, tears of relief streaming down her face. I promised I would return, he murmured against her hair. That evening, after Samuel had reported to the mayor and rested, he came to Lillian's cabin for supper. Over a simple meal, he recounted the expedition, how they'd tracked the Apache band for 3 days before the army had engaged them in a brief skirmish. 2 soldiers and 1 warrior had been killed, with several wounded on both sides. The remaining Apache, including their leader Black Knife, had escaped deeper into the mountains. It was a sad business all around, Samuel concluded. These conflicts solve nothing. The Apache are fighting for their way of life, and our people keep pushing them further into the margins. Will there be more trouble? Lillian asked. Eventually, yes, but perhaps not soon. The army is increasing patrols in the region. He reached across the table to take her hand. But I didn't come here tonight to discuss such grim matters. From his pocket, Samuel produced a small leather pouch. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Lillian's breath caught as he opened the pouch and removed a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the lamplight. This was my grandmother's, Samuel explained, his voice husky with emotion. My grandfather gave it to her when they decided to journey west from Missouri in 1835. They faced unknown dangers and hardships, but they faced them together. He moved to kneel beside her chair, still holding her hand. Lillian Greene, I know we haven't known each other long in terms of time, but my heart recognizes yours as clearly as if we'd been together all our lives. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me at the Triple P, face whatever comes our way together? Joy spilled through Lillian, bright and overwhelming. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Samuel, I will marry you. The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her finger. Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a pledge of all that would come. When? Samuel asked, his forehead resting against hers. How soon can you be my wife? Lillian laughed softly. The school term begins in 2 weeks. Perhaps after that gets underway, late September or early October. 6 weeks, Samuel groaned. That's an eternity. It will give us time to prepare properly, she reasoned, though her heart wanted to agree with him. And for me to get settled with teaching. He sighed dramatically but smiled. Very well, my practical bride, 6 weeks it shall be. The announcement of their engagement was met with universal approval in Agua Caliente. Elizabeth was ecstatic, immediately offering to help with wedding preparations. Reverend Adams beamed when they asked him to perform the ceremony, even Mrs. Hollister shed a tear, declaring she'd known all along that they were perfect for each other. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy ones for Lillian. The school term began successfully, with her 28 pupils proving to be mostly eager learners. Wedding preparations occupied her evenings and weekends, with Elizabeth and other women from town helping to create a simple but lovely wedding dress from fine fabric, ordered from Phoenix. Samuel, meanwhile, completed the purchase of Harvey Thornton's ranch, expanding the Triple Pticus holdings significantly. He also threw himself into preparations at the main house, adding feminine touches he thought Lillian might appreciate and building a new bookcase to hold her collection of books. As the wedding day approached, Lillian found herself reflecting on the remarkable turn her life had taken. 4 months earlier, she had arrived in Arizona Territory, a mail-order bride with no prospects and little hope. Now she was established in a community that valued her, engaged in meaningful work she enjoyed, and about to marry a man she loved deeply. The wedding took place on the first Saturday in October, a perfect autumn day with clear skies and pleasant temperatures. The ceremony in Agua Caliente's small church was attended by nearly the entire town, with Thomas serving as best man and Elizabeth as matron of honor. Lillian would later remember little of the ceremony itself beyond the look in Samuel's eyes as she walked down the aisle toward him, and the feel of his hands holding hers as they spoke their vows. The words, "I now pronounce you man and wife," released a flood of joy that she thought might never subside. The celebration afterward on the grounds of the church was jubilant, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice their number. As the sun began to set, Samuel led Lillian to his wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers by well-wishers to begin the journey to their home. "Mrs. Porter," he said softly as he helped her up, the name still new and wonderful to her ears. "Mr. Porter," she replied with a smile that held all her happiness. The ride to the ranch was magical in the gathering dusk, the land painted in purples and golds by the setting sun. When they arrived, Samuel surprised Lillian by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, my love," he whispered as he set her down in the main room, now warmed by a fire in the hearth and illuminated by dozens of candles. "Home," Lillian repeated, the word filled with meaning. She had found not just a place, but a belonging she'd never known before. Later that night, as they lay in each other's arms, Samuel traced the curve of Lillian's cheek with gentle fingers. "I keep thinking about that day at the depot," he mused. "How close I came to not stopping, to riding past and never knowing you existed. But you did stop," she reminded him. "You saw me crying and couldn't pass by. Best decision I ever made," he said with certainty. "When I told you that you'd been strong long enough, I think I was really telling myself the same thing. I'd been holding myself apart, protecting my heart for so long." "You gave me permission to feel again, Lillian," she kissed him softly. "And you gave me a home, Samuel, not just this house or this land, but a place in the world where I truly belong. Together," he promised. "Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," she agreed, sealing the vow with a kiss. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The Triple P prospered under their joint stewardship, with Lillian proving to have a keen head for the business aspects of ranching while Samuel focused on the practical operations. She continued teaching for 2 years until the birth of their first child, a son they named William Thomas Porter in the autumn of 1880. A daughter, Grace Elizabeth, followed 18 months later, and another son, Joseph Samuel, completed their family in 1884. The main house expanded again to accommodate their growing family, with Samuel adding a nursery and eventually a schoolroom where Lillian taught their children until they were old enough to attend the town school. Agua Caliente grew as well, with the arrival of the railroad in 1883 bringing new prosperity and settlers. Samuel served 2 terms as mayor, helping to guide the town's growth while maintaining its character. Lillian established a small library that eventually grew into a proper town institution, ensuring that books and learning were available to all residents. There were difficult times, drought years when the ranch struggled, a scarlet fever outbreak that nearly claimed young Joseph, conflicts between settlers and remaining indigenous people that Samuel worked tirelessly to mediate peacefully. Through it all, their partnership remained strong, their love deepening with each challenge faced together. On their 20th anniversary in 1898, Samuel surprised Lillian with a trip to San Francisco, their first significant journey away from the Triple P since their marriage. As they stood on the deck of a ferry crossing the bay, Samuel's arm around her waist, Lillian reflected on the path that had brought them to this moment. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Porter," Samuel asked, his hair now silvered at the temples but his eyes still bright with love when they looked at her. I was thinking about how differently my life might have turned out, she admitted. If Harvey Thornton hadn't died, if you hadn't been in Prescott that day, if you'd ridden past without stopping. But I did stop, he reminded her, echoing their conversation from their wedding night. I couldn't ride past a crying woman at the depot. It wasn't in me to leave you there alone. Lillian turned in his arms to face him, her hands resting on his chest. At 43, Samuel Porter was still the handsomest man she'd ever known, the years having only added character to his features. You ever regret it? Saddling yourself with a penniless mail-order bride who wasn't even meant for you, Samuel laughed, the sound carrying across the water. Regret, Lillian Porter, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You, our children, the life we've built together, it's more than I ever dared hope for. Even when I made you sleep in the barn that time, you brought home 20 horses without consulting me, she teased. Even then, he assured her, pulling her closer. Though I maintain those were 20 excellent horses at a bargain price. They were, she conceded with a laugh. And you were right about expanding the North Pasture too, much as it pains me to admit it. Mark this day, Samuel declared dramatically to an imaginary audience. My wife admits I was right about something. Lillian silenced him with a kiss that, even after 20 years, still held all the passion and tenderness of their first. I love you, Samuel Porter, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for stopping that day, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for telling me I'd been strong long enough. I love you, Lillian Porter, he replied, his voice husky with emotion. Thank you for being brave enough to start over, for loving our land almost as much as I do, for giving me a family and a future I never thought I'd have. As the ferry approached the dock and the sun began its descent toward the Pacific, Lillian rested her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive in the midst of our deepest sorrows, and that a moment of kindness can change the course of lives forever. Back at the Triple P Ranch, their story became legend, how the strong, silent rancher had found his mail-order bride crying at the depot, how he'd told her she'd been strong long enough, and how together they'd built one of the most successful ranches in the Arizona Territory. Their descendants would tell it for generations, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and love to transform lives in unexpected ways. And it all began with tears at a dusty depot, and the man who couldn't pass by without offering help, the man who recognized that sometimes the strongest people are those who finally allow themselves to cry.